So I'm here with the cast and crew and director of Queer, a showing here in St. Paul. So let's talk a little bit about the play. What exactly was the idea of this, and how did it kind of come to be?
Well, Queer started out as basically just kind of a LGBT vagina monologues, and the show is all based on submissions or interviews we did with people who identify as part of the queer subculture. And the more interviews we did, the more we found out there are things that are not in the acronym that need to be talked about. So it turned into quite the process of about 3 years of compiling interviews and pulling monologues and short scenes from those interviews. And we found that there's a whole host of things outside of the GLBT that we all grew up with that people identify as and that are not being talked about in our community. So we wanted to give those people and those stories a voice and a stage and bring their stories out into the world.
So to kind of educate people and kind of let those people in those groups know that they are being thought about and they are trying to be fought for.
Yes, and not only that, but they're just as much of the queer community as, you know, a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender person. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what queer is about.
So throughout all of this, y'all had to go through a lot of figuring out your different characters because these were very personal stories of interviews. And did y'all get to interact with your actual person at all, or?
Actually, I didn't have to do much research. I'm the old dude and lived through the 80s. My character, Gary, survived the 80s, long-term survivor, and the G, and never really thought about this. I mean, it was educational for me personally, and I don't know how many times I've insulted people over the years or even in the cast with things that I just didn't think about. You know, it was, and Gary takes a couple of hits for being kind of a insensitive old survivor of the G part of the old acronym.
And that is something that's really important because there were things when I went through watching this and I loved the play, but there were a lot of things where it's like, wow, I said something like that before, or I did this or that, and I'm sure there was probably somebody who was really offended by something I said, and they may not have come out and told me about it, but through things like this, it kind of helps educate and helps people know there are things that you should maybe not be saying or not be doing. Just because even though it may not be intentional on your part, it still may hurt or harm other people. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, just after the process, even after it started, after I was casted and everything, I was actually driving a car with one of my castmates, and I was like, queer. So I thought that was offensive. So I had a lot of questions about the word queer. I had a lot of questions about all the different types of sexual and gender identities that occur in the play. And so at a rehearsal one day, I'm like, you know what? I really just need to ask all these questions because I don't know. And so it was nice. We all sat around and just started discussing what each individual thing was, and that was something that I had no idea. Like all of the different identities and everything, I was like, what does this gender mean, and how is that different than this? So that was a process that I had to go through for a while.
Yeah, and it was also learning the difference between identity and sexuality. Because a lot of the time people think they're one and the same, and I did for a while think I was like, but if you're this, but that's gender. Oh, so if, you know, it's also just learning the terminology of it so you can use it correctly and know what the hell you're talking about. As well, you know, I mean, I learned a lot from that, and it seems that I think everybody around the world, no matter what, fits into this show in some kind of way, because at the end we're like, so what's this and what's this and what's that? I was like, oh, I'm that. And you know, of what you identify with all the terms that we say, you know, at the end it's very inclusive, so it's like somebody can identify with it, with
a character,
or with one of the terms that's mentioned in the show. I
think that's kind of a cool point too, because I mean, I'm a gay man, and I talked about this the other night when we were going through all this. The person I identified with the most wasn't the gay character. It was it was you. I'm like I'm sitting back there and I'm just bawling. I'm bawling like a baby, and I'm just like I don't know what it was. I'm like, why you? I mean, I'm not a lesbian here. It's not like that's my issue, you know. And like I didn't get shipped overseas, you know. Like I don't understand, but I was just bawling at your part and connected really well with your character.
Well, I think it's surprising because a lot of the character I play is a lesbian Indian woman, right? And she comes out to her family, and I think that is a sort of a universal piece of the struggle of coming out to your family and friends and what to do with that, right? And she takes a kind of unexpected turn, right? And her family's actually accepting, and they turn it around and say, hey, you should be dating these women, you know? So it's it's a really hopeful story at the end, and a lot about her struggles and being able to come out at the end and show that strength. So I guess that piece makes sense that you would relate to that, right? So
I think the beauty of the show too is that it takes all these like people or all these types of people and personalizes it so much, because it is really you hear different coming out stories, you hear different people's struggles all the time, but these are very personal. It's very much about this person's struggle. It's not that they're gay or lesbian or transgender or whatever. It's that it's their personal struggle or not struggle. It's just their story, and that makes it really fun to watch because you get to see that character develop throughout the whole show as well. But it also makes it relatable to everyone because these are just people. It's not just about labels. It's people.
A good friend of ours came to watch the show, and she said the thing she enjoyed the most was that because they are real people's stories, that it makes the characters real. It's not a caricature version or a stereotyped version of what that identity is. It's not a stereotypical gay man. It's a real gay person who has real gay struggles that makes them the human being that they are. And I think that because each one of us has that root to being an actual human being, it's so much easier for us to connect to that person and that character and telling that story.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that's a great point because we talked a lot about terminology and labels, but that's not really, I mean, we want people to figure out how they identify and feel comfortable with that, but the show is really about acceptance and having the trust to accept however someone might be different than you, right? And that's why when it ends with the thought of we're all human, that's the key, I think, label that fits everyone, right? So,
it deals with labels head on. You know, we want to live in a society where we know we have red hair, but does it really matter? You know, so it's that whole idea that, you know, when we have a label, whether it's housewife, businessman, bisexual, no matter what it is, to not wear it on our sleeve, not have it be a part of our human experience. And I think that's the whole concept behind the show. At the end, we all say human after we have interacted with each other and spent time on stage alone having our monologues. But we're still our character, the entire piece. And so I think it's a unique piece because you can actually view somebody who has identified as something verbally in front of the audience, go through a process of how they deal with that in interaction with other characters. And that's what I think is so powerful about this piece because you can see that.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, we have all these identifiers, but there's this transcending label of being human and being equal that really pulls us all together and makes us one.
When you see any sort of queer art in the world, you see the sappy lifetime, you know, my gay son came out and then he killed himself because he was gay, or like my mom couldn't accept me because in all this like negativity. And you know, I've been out for 15, 16 years now, and like I haven't killed myself, I haven't, you know, done any, you know, and it's more than just, as queer people, our lives don't peak when we come out, and our story doesn't end when we come out of the closet. And that was really important to us, to tell the stories about, we've all heard these sob stories about, you know, my son killed himself, or it was really hard for me to come out, and and it was important to us to be like, this is not the sole experience of a queer person. Your life continues, and you have to deal with things on a daily basis. There's things just besides the hate you deal with from coming out. You have to deal with, you know, coming out to your coworkers and coming, you know, and then other things that we talk about in the play. It's not just about coming out, it's about living out, and that's significantly harder than coming out, in my opinion. So
yeah, and sometimes it's even harder to like get outside that scope when like you're just stuck in that rut of like, should I be out? How out can I be? Like my character Nick, who pretty much is like, you don't know as much about him as the rest of the characters. Like he's more of what I call an angry poet. He's angry for a lot of really valid reasons, and like he kind of hides his identity in little snippets in both of the poem pieces that I perform, and it's just like you find out later on that he's trans, that he's pan, that he's queer, but like other than that, like there's a lot of backstory that you don't know about, and it's like to me it's like he's trying to hide his identities, but at the same time trying to confront everyone else about how fucked up everything is and try to be one of his own at the same time. So
I mean, my hope would be the voices that we present here would actually help combat the negativity, right?
Yeah.
And help people realize that they're not alone, that there's, you know, these struggles that are ongoing, and there are some hopeful stories, and we are making progress. Because I think it can be very isolating, right? I mean, there's so many circumstances where you can feel like you're alone, and there is no other recourse, and that's, you know, especially young people, I think, would feel that way in that kind of pressure. So hopefully by getting the voices out, that's something that will help combat that.
And one of the strengths, I think, of the piece is the way that the writers utilized humor to get really, really powerful points across. There's some hilarious one. These two do a scene about racism in the queer community, and it's so potent and so powerful and such a learning experience to watch it. But it's hilarious.
Yeah, it really is.
And I think it's important to kind of, when you're introducing some of these ideas to people, to bring the levity